It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. I'm Craig Hoffman. That is Logan Paulsen. And we enter now week 3, Logan, of the offensive coordinator search. And somehow it is growing as opposed to being narrowed down. Eric Bieniemy is going to get an interview. We'll see when, or one's been requested. Same for Anthony Lynn, most recently assistant head coach with the 49ers, who obviously now his season is over for Bieniemy. He is allowed to interview in this time
for Lynn, right?
Oh, well,
season's over. Season's over for Lynn. Yep.
And then Bieniemy is allowed to interview in this time between the championship games and the Super Bowl. For him, as Kansas City is off to face Philadelphia. Also, Kellen Moore is now available. Somewhat of a surprise there. The Cowboys move on from him. So is that someone that Washington should consider hiring? Is it someone they should at least consider for an interview? Little gamesmanship, perhaps. Hey, how does Mike McCarthy think about offense? That's a question we'll ask later in the podcast. But let's start, Logan, with just this process in general for Ron Rivera. It has taken a lot longer than I think some people expected. I think a lot of us expected it to be over relatively quickly. But it also is pretty in line with the rest of the league. The rest of the league seems to be waiting as well. And there's a couple reasons why. Sean Payton on the head coaching front, is he going to do anything? That OC job in LA to go get to coach Justin Herbert is one that a lot of the top candidates perhaps are waiting on. But for Washington, it seems like they're waiting on someone who is not available to them yet. And I'm curious why that is. Like, obviously, there's candidates that have to play out playoff games, but does that say anything about the candidates they've interviewed so far, that they would be settling for someone, or does Ron just have the luxury because of who he's looking at to kind of wait it out and make everyone wait with him?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really interesting process because initially, like, kind of all signs, at least in my opinion, were pointing to this idea that, he was going to hire somebody that he knew, that he felt familiar with, that was kind of running a similar version of what they were doing the year before. And I think that made a lot of sense because, you kind of have we've talked about the ownership and how there's this year parameter. We've talked about Sam Howell and how that's probably beneficial for him and his growth. It's probably beneficial for everybody in the offense, right? If it's closer rather than further away from what they were doing last year. However, in like a recent interview with Julie Donaldson, he kind of mentioned that he's looking for something a little bit different, right? And so we were kind of all looking at these candidates from this lens, in the sense saying, oh, he's looking for basically a retread of Scott Turner with more experience. And that's why everyone was kind of saying Shermer.
Right, a better version of Turner.
Right. Shermer or Zampese felt like the guy because that's what they were, right? They had experience. They've called plays before. They've been around a long time. And no one was really inspired by that hire. And I think the length of this interview process, I think, kind of probably speaks to the fact that he is looking for something a little bit different than what everybody thought. And I think that it's probably a good thing, from a football high concept standpoint. But I also think that it's going to be tough to learn a new offense for a lot of these guys. So while there are some benefits to it, there also are some negatives. And with any decision, just going with a retread type guy, or a guy who's very similar to Scott, has its own disadvantages because you're in kind of the same offense. But it'll be really interesting to see what they finally do here. And it does feel like they're waiting for somebody in the playoff picture, right? They're waiting to get access to somebody. And maybe that's just to kind of flesh out their final evaluation. You mentioned Bieniemy, and I think, Andy Reid's relationship to Ron is extremely well documented. So if Andy Reid kind of says, hey, Bieniemy's your guy, I'm sure Ron would take that, in the same way that if, one of my old mentors was like, hey man, this is what you should do. I'd probably be like, all right, yeah, I'm going to really take a good look at that. So I think he's probably, that feels like what they're doing right now. I don't have any information on that at all, but that's kind of what it feels like. It feels like they're waiting to kind of get Bieniemy to interview. And then I don't know who else they would have to interview after that, quite frankly, before they make a decision.
Yeah, you're starting to run out of guys, unless there's someone on Philly staff, which it seems like all the Philly folks are the ones that are up for the top jobs, right, if you will. They're younger guys, maybe looking for a little bit more stability. Steichen's obviously their OC is looking at head coaching jobs. Their quarterbacks coach is said to be in the mix for a couple of OC jobs, not including here. So it certainly would be from the Kansas City side of things. And I don't know, it's interesting because you talk about the benefits of the same offense, whatever. Like, all offenses work on paper. So
Right.
it's a matter of how it's called and how it's taught. And perhaps sometimes not even in that order. How it's taught, like how well your players are prepared to execute is really, really essential, down in, down out. And then obviously you need to be able to sequence it well in the games to maximize it. So it's not like you need to switch offenses, because the offense that existed here was a quote unquote good offense. It just wasn't taught very well, and it wasn't maximized by the sequencing and the play calling. That said, I think it's pretty easy to fight back against the continuity argument, because continuing what? Like, they've been 25th, 26th, 27th, like in that range of offense every year Scott Turner was here. So maybe it's not a great fit for the pieces that are here. Maybe there are some things that need to be changed. And so it kind of gets to like, what is the best version? Like, I know you're obviously not interviewing candidates, so it's, asking you like, who would you hire is not really a fair question, but from that profile standpoint, in terms of an actual offense and then the characteristics of the person that you want, like, what is it that you would be looking for if you're Rivera? Not what you think he's looking for, but what you would be looking for.
Well, I think what I would be looking for is someone from one of these trees, one of these Kyle Shanahan, Gary Kubiak trees, and they've got a couple guys that have interviewed from those point of views. And I also think like this Bieniemy hire is really interesting to me. Like, Bieniemy was a coach when I was at UCLA, so he coached me. He coached the running backs when I was there. And he is a guy who, in my experience, he's a very aggressive communicator, but he finds a way to kind of teach and motivate, and his standard is extraordinarily high. And so I don't think there's it's not like, a random thing that he goes, at UCLA, he's got Maurice Jones-Drew, who's an excellent football player, but almost wins the Heisman that year. Then he goes to Minnesota with Adrian Peterson, and Adrian Peterson breaks kind of all of his personal records under Eric Bieniemy's tutelage. Like, he is a guy who has a absolute standard and is going to let you know about that standard. And, that's one of the criticisms of the previous staff, was that how well were they being coached? They didn't always know. And at least in my experience, and this was 15 years ago, like, that was the guy that he was. And, you hear guys about Kansas City, how he's, that's kind of how it seems like he's maintained that kind of posture. So if you want someone who's going to be kind of dynamic and aggressive, I think that's interesting. So I think the reason I bring that up is because I want someone who's an excellent teacher. And I think you hit something very interesting there. Like, is it the play calling sequence, or is it how you teach it? Because when you watch Kansas City's offense, like I went back before this last playoff game and watched some of their games, it's not like they're doing anything magical. It's like the guys just know what to do. They know what the concept is designed to do. And they run their routes according, like Travis Kelce, like I've talked about this before, but it just blows my mind that more teams don't do this. So on scissors, right? So you're running the tight end's running a corner, the outside receiver's running a post. Mm-hmm. Every single team runs that concept. It is good versus cover 3. It's okay versus cover 2. It's probably dead versus quarters because there's two dudes standing right there, but it can be good versus quarters. So I remember in the preseason game, they're running scissors. The Commanders have it covered. They've matched it correctly. And on the corner, Travis Kelce just runs a sit. And he's in this huge void. And again, that's something that they have built in that offense. And so it is interesting. Like, do they teach that? Or is that just players being players? Is that Kelce and Mahomes having great chemistry? Because a big portion of their offense is the feel of Patrick Mahomes and the feel of these guys in the room. But again, like, so teaching, executing, all those things are a super high priority for me. So again, I'm partial to the tree that I'm from. So, Stoodsville is a guy that I think is very interesting. London is a guy that I think is very interesting. The tight end coach from LA is interesting. But again, the parameter of that 1 year would probably make me lean to Stoodsville. And then I think the Bieniemy hire is interesting because of this kind of the pedigree that he brings and the standard that he brings. And it'll be interesting to see if he could do it outside of the halo of Andy Reid, but I do think that's interesting.
So let's double down on Bieniemy here. One, that is absolutely his reputation in the league. Like, he and Mahomes have famously got into it. They obviously have a very good relationship and continued to work together, but they have gotten into it over on the sideline or in practice, and that is pretty well known, that because he holds guys to such a high standard and he can be a brash and harsh communicator at times, that it can rub players the wrong way. So having the right staff, and that's where someone like a Rivera or an Andy Reid to be able to smooth things over is important. If you're Patrick Mahomes or Travis Kelce and you're confident and comfortable with who you are as a player, that can work. Mm-hmm. You need players who are confident and have strong personalities to be able to withstand that. I don't say withstand, but like take that kind of coaching. It becomes either withstand or take, right?
Right. Yeah.
That kind of coaching, and if they take it, then it's really positive. If they're just withstanding it, then you better be winning, because otherwise, when you don't, there's going to be resentment. It's going to blow up, or it can just break and melt players. But you do have you talk about Peterson and MJD, like Brian Robinson went to Alabama. Like, that dude's used to hard coaching.
Right.
So could he really thrive under someone like Bieniemy? So that's part one in terms of his reputation, and the standard part sounds great. But you do have to wonder what his reputation is as a communicator, and if that's why he struggled in some of these head coaching interviews, where maybe the reputation is, this will work if you have a head coach over it who can mitigate some of that communication, but also would not work himself as a head coach. So that's something to consider with that part of it. But the question so I've got two questions really about Bieniemy. One, how much of what is happening in Kansas City is him versus Andy, which I only care about because if he's going to come here, like, is you just getting a guy who's worked under Andy Reid, and then you don't get Andy Reid, and then it doesn't work, or can he really truly bring that here? Whether he's been doing it in KC or not, frankly, it's not really about the credit there. It's about his ability to take those same details and some of the things that Andy has been doing since he was in Philly in the early 2000s and Green Bay in the 90s. Like, they've been great in the screen game, for instance, the entire time. So are you going to get that Andy Reid quality with someone else? And then the other thing is, why would Bieniemy come here? Like, if it's an OC move, like, I guess because Reid does some of, if not all of the play calling there, it's not quite a lateral move. And I know his contract is up as well. So it is a situation where he's a coaching free agent at the end of the season. And I think Andy's probably been preparing for him to leave for a long time, because he would assume that he would have gotten a head coaching job by now. But, like, what is it about this or any other job? Like, if you're going to be an OC, why wouldn't you just stay in Kansas City? That's what I don't understand about this Bieniemy situation. Like, I guess if you're him, it makes sense. Or if Andy's like, hey, man, if you ever want to become a head coach, it's pretty clear you got to go somewhere else and, like, do this outside of my ring. And maybe that's the appealing thing. It's better career advancement for Bieniemy. But I really don't understand what it is that would be appealing about leaving Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and competing for a Super Bowl every year.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that it seems like a lateral move, but I do think at some point all coaches want to kind of get out of the shadow of their mentor. And let's break this down into multiple parts, because you have multiple questions. So, is there value to him coming here, having been in the Andy Reid system for 10 years? Absolutely. And what I mean by that is because you see how Andy teaches stuff, right? It's not random that Mike Kafka, the OC in New York, coaches the offense the way they do. It's because he's seen Andy Reid do it. It's kind of like watching how Kyle did stuff and then how Sean adopted a lot of what Kyle did, not from a concept standpoint, but from a communication standpoint and from a point of emphasis standpoint. And that is valuable, to have guys who see how Kyle or Sean grinds the tape, how they communicate, how they interact with players. That is valuable because those guys are successful. Now, you don't want them to mirror them one for one, but you want them to bring their own flavor to it, and that's what's going to make them a good coordinator. But I think that is really valuable. Like, being in different systems, being with greatness, so to speak, and understanding how to kind of evolve. Like Andy Reid, I mean, I talk about Kyle a lot, but I have never been more impressed with a coach than Andy Reid, or maybe the guy in Philadelphia. And why is that? It's because they had a system, this kind of high-flying Philadelphia, Donovan McNabb, fast receiver system. He goes to Kansas City, and Alex Smith is the quarterback, and they become a run-first team, like running 60% of the time, and majoring in that, majoring in different personnel, and for you as a coach to identify that and make those changes is truly remarkable. And that's essentially what Sirianni did in Philadelphia. He was a spread them out, get the ball over the field type guy, and then was like, no, we're going to be a run-first, kind of insulate the quarterback type of offense for a while. And then they grew into this kind of modern iteration, the team that's going to the Super Bowl. So I think to have someone who's been around Andy Reid for 10 years, talk about stuff rubbing off on you. You're going to know how he teaches the screen game. You're going to know how he teaches concepts. You're going to know how he preps. That's another thing that's really, really valuable. So I was with Frank Smith in Chicago, and he was under Sean Payton in New Orleans for a long time, for like 7 years. And one of the things that he would always bring to our meetings is how Sean would break down the film and like, oh, we got to look at third down in this way. We got to look at the red zone in this way. And that was extremely advantageous for me because it showed the level of detail that New Orleans was approaching the game with. And I think that is very, very valuable just to have. And now, how much of it, like I think you see like Bill Belichick's tree, right? And how they come out and they're not doing that well as head coaches or offensive coordinators or whatever it may be. I think a big part of that is because they try too much to be like Bill. Like you need to kind of take that information, internalize it, and then execute it as you feel is appropriate. But I do think, to me, that's very, very valuable to kind of have that, that exposure, I think. And I think it would be awesome to have a guy like that here. Now, would it work?
Yeah.
Who knows? Because like to your second point, like that offense is sick. Like they've got 5 dudes who are balling on the offensive line. They've got excellent skill position player depth. They've got the best quarterback in football. Like I was watching the first Cincinnati game right before I got on here, and the offense is good. They're super efficient running the football because they've got excellent offensive linemen and excellent backs, and the scheme's excellent. So all those things kind of can you have a good running game without one of those things? Probably, but it's going to be much harder. And then you get Patrick Mahomes, who's just balling. So is Andy Reid's scheme as they're running it in Kansas City now transcendent enough to elevate the playmakers that they have here in Washington? And I think that is a really big question. Or would it require a certain amount of innovation from a guy like Bieniemy to kind of more acutely fit what they've got going on here now? And that to me is the major question in him leaving Kansas City. He has everything, every possible thing you could want. Right. And here, unfortunately, it's not the same thing.
It would be interesting if he's the hire to go back, and I guess we'll probably do this if he is the hire, go back to when they had Tyreek there. Yeah. Because that's probably a closer version of what this offense will attempt to look like in Washington with Howell and then the speed guys on the outside, right? They're now so Travis Kelce heavy, and it got even worse yesterday against Cincinnati because all their dudes got hurt on the outside, and they were down to literally 3 healthy receivers. They got Jody Fortson out there playing slot receiver because they have to. But they used to have, Tyreek and then Mecole Hardman, and there was another super fast guy whose name I'm forgetting. But they had the same like thing that Washington has, where they got multiple 4-3 guys out there. Obviously, Tyreek is a 4-2, maybe a 4-1 guy. He's literally the fastest player in the sport. But Terry, can do a lot of that stuff. Jahan can do a lot of that stuff. And that would be really interesting to see how they leverage that speed, and could Bieniemy bring that here. All in all, it's going to be interesting because he also, we say all that, he is a running backs coach by trade, and obviously he's been an OC for a long time. I don't know how much play calling he does versus how much Andy does. It seems like both of them are talking pretty frequently when they do like the cutaways on the sideline. We can certainly get someone from KC on who would know and get more insight into that if he's the hire or he becomes the favorite later in the week. But there's so much good there. There's so much intrigue there in terms of that like level of detail set to excellent. That's something this team needs. Right. That's something this team desperately needs. And, even if it would be for a year and everyone gets blown out and then someone else comes in, that feels like it would be a good thing for like a Terry McLaurin to really understand and get. Not that Terry's like a lazy player, but sometimes you don't know what you don't know. These guys are still relatively young. Terry's had so much turnover, with offensive coaches in his career. Like, could you get a Bieniemy in here even for a year and have that be something that takes his career to an even higher level when he's already one of the 10 best receivers in football? A young guy like Jahan learning that, I think that could be really good for all of them, and Curtis too. See what he could do with him, considering what they used to do with Tyreek and as a running back and all those things. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. Craig Hoffman, Logan Paulsen. Logan, of course, 10-year NFL veteran. I host the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, 3 to 6 every weekday. Used to be on the beat covering Washington. If you're new to the program, make sure you're subscribed. We would appreciate it anywhere you're listening or watching right now. So the other name that came out over the weekend, Logan, is Anthony Lynn, former Chargers head coach, was last year, like I guess 2 last years ago, if you will, the OC in Detroit. They move on from him. Their offense took off under Ben Johnson this year. But Lynn went out to San Francisco this past season, and was the assistant head coach under Kyle and had some other responsibilities, running backs coach, I think, out there. So what do you make of him as a candidate? And also, as we were talking about this before the show, you noticed a pattern here that to you speaks to something perhaps even larger than Anthony Lynn.
Yeah, I mean, I think the pattern is interesting. They just seem to be interviewing a lot of running backs coaches. I know there's a lot of guys who are not running backs coaches, but that seems to be something that they're prioritizing, or maybe they're prioritizing. I don't know. It seems a little weird because I'm trying to think, like, there are very few, OCs who are former running back coach. I mean, they've been a running back coach at some point in their career, but to go from running back coach to OC, it just seems like an unusual path. Like they usually go O-line coach, quarterback coach, even tight ends coach. That's a more common way to go. But so I just was surprised by that because usually running back coaches lack a little bit of like detailed understanding when it comes to the pass game, and they lack a little bit of detailed understanding when it comes to this is a big generalization, so it's not true for everybody, but of the details of the offensive line when it comes to blocking certain looks, right? Because the back just is kind of reading the play out, and oftentimes they're not talking super specifically about like the fronts or the adjustments versus this pressure. And so I don't know, it just is interesting. Now, Anthony Lynn is a little bit different because he was a former head coach, because he was an OC in Buffalo for a while. He kind of, there's a quote of him when he was in Buffalo getting the job, and he said, we're going to find a way to take shots down the field and be explosive and do all these different things. I'm not sure how that turned out for him that year, but it is interesting to me that his name comes up because I know him as a head coach. His offenses were okay in Buffalo, not great. The teams were okay, not great in Buffalo. So I find it kind of interesting that he comes up. And he did have a relationship with Jack in Jacksonville. I think Jack fired him after a year or something like that. So maybe that's what it is. But, I think his reputation is very positive. But in terms of like actually calling plays, I think he's kind of had, limited success, I would say.
Yeah, I'm looking actually through all of the OCs right now, and it's definitely mostly quarterbacks coaches, assistant quarterback coaches. You got a couple of O-line coaches in there, but like you said, the profile here is super interesting, and obviously everyone talks about how much Rivera wants to run the football, and that's how they want to build this team. But to you, like when we were talking about this before the show, you said then you shouldn't be necessarily looking at running backs coaches. Right. You should be looking at O-line coaches. That does, to me, though, I guess, at least if you're a running backs coach, there's some elements of the passing game that you're familiar with. And depending on how you run your offense, like some running backs, line up in the slot quite a bit. And you have to understand a little bit more there, where the offensive line literally doesn't care about the pass concepts other than like, hey, this is a deeper developing concept, or this is quick game. There's not the actual ins and outs of the route are second, or I would say not even secondary. They don't matter. That said, it also matters who you know and what staff and all those kinds of things. And I do wonder if someone like Lynn, who's been a head coach, perhaps could bring in other folks that he likes, and I'm going to come with this wide receivers coach, and he's great at teaching the nuances of the routes the way we want them taught, and that's something that they can worry about, and I'll focus on the things that I'm great at. Not everyone can be great at everything. Like if you're a quarterback coach, some of the finer, or a lot of protection stuff, but the finer points of teaching it, like the points of emphasis on hand placement, like you're not going to know. So how much of it is like who you know and who you can bring versus your own skill set? Because someone like Sean and Kyle, like they get out there and they run routes with receivers and they're stopping down and it looks really great in training camp and everyone's like, wow, look at the attention to detail. But if you're Bill Callahan, like getting in there with the O lineman, doing that as the OC, it maybe not get quite as much credit, even though it's just as important as long. And then you just rely on your receivers coach and your quarterback and the quarterback's coach to take care of some of that other stuff.
Yeah, so a couple things there. So first, let me say, like, the fact that Lynn was hired by Kyle, I think is a testament to him and the level of detail that he's going to approach things with. Because Kyle does not tolerate, a non-detailed coach very well. He wants guys he holds guys to a very high standard. So the fact that he's in there, I think, and he's the assistant head coach, which is a very it kind of is a symbolic title largely, but it is significant that you get that title. It shows that they have a lot of respect for you. It increases your pay, all those different things. So I think that's part of it. In terms of, so when I say the detail thing, so let's just take Sean, for example. Like, Sean knew the rules on every single protection. He knew the rules on every single route. He knew the rules for every single drop back. And that was him as a tight end coach. He knew all of that stuff at a very high detail level. And traditionally, like the running back coaches that I've been exposed to are great coaches at coaching running backs. But in terms of having that comprehensive, detailed understanding of the offense, it hasn't been to that level, which is, again, maybe my career bias, because I'm like, this is an awesome dude. He knows how to coach running backs at a really high level, but he never had like that transcendent quality. And obviously Lynn does, because he has been head coach. So someone somewhere thought, man, this guy's pretty impressive. And I've heard him give interviews. He's a very, very sharp guy. Does that make him a good play caller? I think his career is a little bit hit or miss in that area. But so that's kind of what I'm saying when I say knowing stuff, because like all the guys now that I played with or that coached me that are now in OC positions, their level of detailed understanding of the offense was incredibly high, because they could coach literally any position. They could say, hey, the quarterback, hey, we're going to go, this is the read progression. Now they like to your point, sometimes you need a special quarterback coach who says, hey, when we get to our fifth step, it's really a fifth and a little bit of a hitch to get this ball out. I don't know if Sean or Frank Smith or Wes Phillips would know that level of detail to coach the position, but they knew where the ball should go versus coverage X. So that's more what I'm talking about. It's just kind of this global understanding of the offense. And to your second point about can he bring people in, I think there is an advantage to that. There's an advantage to saying, like, he knows people. He's been around for a long time. Person X is a very good O-line coach. We need to get him in here. Person Y is a very good quarterback coach who's good at developing young talent. Or maybe he's a younger coach that I was exposed to when I was wherever I was, and I want to give him an opportunity.
Hey, if you can get some guy from Kyle's staff out in San Francisco, poach him, that Kyle's been mentoring, then that's a great person to have. Right.
And I think I don't think it just seems like it's a strange position to pull from, running back coach. Usually you see, hey, it's a quarterback coach, it's an O-line coach, it's even a receiver coach. I'd be a little bit like, what's that about? Because they don't usually have a global understanding of the offense the way those other positions do. Even a tight end coach, because they, like we talked about, they coach protections, they coach routes, they coach all the different elements of it. So that's the only reason that I'm kind of like, this is a weird point of emphasis. But of the two, I'm definitely more excited about Bieniemy. But I don't know. I think that's probably more associated with name recognition. I think it's like Lynn's probably because he's called plays, he's done it in his own kind of sphere before. Maybe a better endorsement of him than people want to give it credit for, or at least I do.
Yeah, definitely. So he's been a part of some really good run offenses, and I think that's obviously the appeal. He was there with Rex Ryan and those Jets teams that went to back-to-back AFC Championship games. He was the running backs coach on those teams. And then I think was also 15-16 would have been with Rex in Buffalo. He was the assistant head coach and running backs coach there, and then eventually the OC in that second year before getting to the Chargers as head coach. So even like his year in Detroit last year, like, were they good? No. Were they a team that were as good as they were offensively this year? Absolutely not. But they did have some pretty big rushing numbers. Like DeAndre Swift had a good year, and Jamal Williams had a good year. And so it is like what he does, he clearly does well. The question is what he does what you want? And the same thing for, all these other guys that we're talking about. Like, what is the philosophy? How does it go to the personnel that we have here? And can you implement and teach it? And then we get back to all the stuff we were talking off the top. But it is interesting that, Charles London, Bieniemy, even though, again, he and Lynn have been OCs, like it is there's a clear path. Like Rivera is telling us something about this. He's not going nuts getting a bunch of quarterbacks coaches in here for interviews.
Yeah, and I do think this is another thing I wanted to bring up about the coordinator thing. Just because you're a good coach does not mean you're a good coordinator. Like, it's a different type of coaching. And I think that's important for people to understand. Like, I'm sure Lynn, I'm sure all these dudes are fantastic coaches. That's why they're in this mix. It's just about taking that style of coaching and saying, does this project to being a coordinator on some level?
And that's where something like Lynn's head coaching experience would be good. Because, he was a good head coach in LA. He wasn't great, but they had a couple of double-digit win seasons his first couple of years there.
Yeah, they were 12-4 with Philip Rivers his first year. Yeah,
and then obviously things went a little sideways. They ultimately get rid of him and bring in Staley as they draft Justin Herbert. But if you can get up in front of the room and command the room, that's a huge skill as a coordinator. And Lynn very clearly has that and has a lot of experience doing that in front of the full room, nevertheless, just the offensive room.
I mean, absolutely. So I think that's why, when you're so there's a couple things like on a resume that I like to see. I like to see, hey, was this guy a pass game coordinator? Was he a run game coordinator? Because that shows that you are developing a plan. You know how to kind of game plan and make things happen. The other thing is you want to see how they communicate with the team, because that's a huge part of it. Because you're not just teaching 4 guys, you're teaching 30 guys. And that is something that is really hard. And, one of the things Kyle used to do, and again, that I think is really interesting, is he would do his offensive install with the entire team in there. He would I've been on staffs where the O-line would leave, the tight ends leave, and he would let the position coaches do that. But one of the things I think Kyle did a good job was identifying, I'm good at installing and communicating coaching points. So I'm going to do this for the whole team. And I thought that was really interesting to kind of know where your strengths are. And then it also speaks to the thing you were talking about earlier. Do you hire a whole bunch of coaches you trust to break out and install the offense the way you want to install it? So I think all that stuff is really compelling. And I think a guy like Lynn, who's had that type of experience as a head coach, he can delegate. He's a position coach. He knows the X's and O's. I think it is valuable. That's why Studesville is interesting, right? Because he's been a coordinator at some point in his career. That's why Shermer's interesting, because they've done it. They have experience with it. And Bieniemy is good because, again, I think probably handles the actual day-to-day installs. I don't know if he handles the play calling, but all those things make you gravitate towards those candidates because they've done it. And because you only have a year here, you need to make sure the person you're hiring feels very comfortable doing that.
No doubt about it. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. Craig Hoffman, Logan Paulsen. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, just subscribe to us right now if you're not already. Spotify, they call it a follow, Logan, as opposed to a subscribe. But you can do that there. And then if you're watching on YouTube, hello, hi, you can subscribe right down there at 1067 The Fan, or if you're watching clips on my page as well at Craig Hoffman, just go ahead and subscribe. If you're watching on one and you're already subscribed, go to the other one and subscribe there. Just make sure you don't miss a thing. All right. Kellen Moore and the Cowboys have mutually parted ways. Mike McCarthy is going to take over the day-to-day play calling duties and the day-to-day OC duties down in Dallas, which I think is very interesting and possibly worth a discussion for a second, just as one of the teams in the division now has a new pretty important coach, so to speak, new in quotation marks there. And what does that mean for Dak in that offense? But as far as Moore goes, does he intrigue you as a candidate here? Let's just start simply there.
Yeah, I mean, he does. I think he fits very closely what I think Ron wants to do in terms of run first. He understands the importance of the run game. He understands how to insulate the quarterback, and you see that when you watch them. I think it's a little surprising that they agreed to part ways. That's a weird way to word that, but it feels a little bit like McCarthy was kind of someone had to go. So Dan Quinn did an excellent job this year. He's an excellent job for 2 years. So kind of like what happened with Mike LaFleur up in New York, how someone had to get fired. It feels like this might be something similar to that, where to keep for McCarthy to keep his job, one of the coordinators has to go, and he just kind of picked the lesser of two evils. So
Well,
I
yeah,
think
and also Quinn, they're super psyched about what he's doing. So
yeah, he's doing a great job. I mean, you watch what he did against San Francisco in the playoff game 2 weeks ago. Like, it's like, man, that guy's balling. He
yeah,
understands what he's doing. It's excellent. So, um, yeah, I think he'd be a great fit. I mean, he's a young, talented offensive mind. He played quarterback. I think that bodes really well for a guy like Sam, if Sam is the guy next year. So, I think he would take this job? No, but am I excited about him? Yeah, and I think he's a guy that's going to be in line for a higher profile job. Maybe even a head coaching position if things go well for him.
yeah. He interviewed and was one of the folks in play in Carolina. And the thought was, wow, the Cowboys surprisingly are going to keep both coordinators after he didn't get the job in Carolina. And then it was like, well, actually, they're going to make a change. And I don't know. He's a guy that's interesting because a lot of Cowboys fans are really frustrated by him. But I do think it's a be careful what you wish for situation.
Right.
He's good, just because you made some questionable decisions with your personnel at wide receiver, getting rid of Amari Cooper and on Michael Gallup's not back to full strength because he was coming off an ACL in the very last game of the year last year. And some of the other younger guys are not quite there yet. Like, that's a decision your personnel people made and Jerry Jones to an extent made. And to blame that on Kellen Moore seems silly, but there also are times where they got in some lulls and there was some questionable play calling. There's some inconsistency with that offense that I know was a little bit more valid in the complaint department. As far as trying, like, you would on the merit of, hey, I might want to hire this guy, you would request an interview. Would you also want to request an interview just to talk to him and try to see if you can glean any information about how they think about offense down there in Dallas and, ask a couple of probing questions and see if you can get some intel on a division rival?
I think people need to understand that it's closer. It's way closer. The NFL as a coaching tree is way closer than people think. Like, I remember going to the combine and coaches from different staffs who are buddies having dinner and they're talking ball. They're talking, oh, like we do it like this and we did it. So there is a lot in terms of insider information. I don't think there's any insider information that would be gleaned. I think that's the thing that I think a lot of people don't understand is when you watch film, it's insider information.
Right.
You get to see what they're thinking about. You get to see the percentages they're trying to run. On third down, we're going to run this concept 60% of the time or whatever it is. On first down, we like these 5 runs. And so if you study it, you can find it. Now, I think there is an advantage to kind of saying, like what informs this philosophy? Why did you feel like you needed to do this with Dak or with whoever? And I think that is really advantageous, that kind of next level of detail. But in terms of kind of saying, oh, we're going to get some like really good, juicy piece of information out of this, I'm not sure that that's entirely true. Maybe a little bit, but it goes both ways. Those conversations could be easily had, if you have a good relationship with Moore at the combine, at the Senior Bowl, at the whatever those big NFL events are. Like, those guys come together and they talk a lot. And I think that's one of the reasons the NFL is such a big copycat league, is because there is this constant dissemination of information. Like, I went down to tight end U and I was like, George, like, how do you coach this, this Zorro technique that you're talking about? And it was like, oh yeah, and just drew it up on the board. It's not like people are hiding this stuff. It's out there. And so obviously I think if you want to have a conversation with him, like, do it. Yeah, great. Do your due diligence. And I think it's also good to have an interview with somebody is he the best OC in the NFL? No, but is he like kind of maybe that second tier OC who's really, really good, and just have a comparison point for some of these other candidates that are coming in? I think that is a really excellent way to look at it too. Like, how impressive is this guy on the whiteboard from an X's and O's standpoint, and how does he stack up to some of these other candidates, some of these young candidates? Because, Moore's a relatively young coach, so maybe London.
At this point, he's got 3-4 years of play calling experience. So
right. And so maybe London has a better interview and is a little bit more impressive and has better references. And you say, well, man, compared to Moore, maybe London's the guy that is going to be a little bit more transcendent as a play caller. So I would do it just to kind of flush out the evaluation, just have a data point. And maybe he says, yeah, I want to be the OC here. I don't think so, but I think it's always good to get more information, have good comparison points, and just widen your knowledge base.
I've only heard of one really like closely held secret. And obviously the level that I've been around these conversations is different than yours. But a couple of years ago when Lorenzo was still playing, there was one summer where Randall Cobb was also in town working out with us, with Chris Gorez and myself and Zoe. And we were talking about Aaron Rodgers and the scramble drill. And Randall was like, I'm not telling you guys anything. He's like, I don't trust you. Looking at Zoe, is like a player, and you know, he's like, we could play you guys in the Super Bowl, and I don't need you knowing our scramble drill rules, because it is like he was basically like, yes, it is organized. It is not like we're going out there and running around just hoping that Aaron finds us. Like, there are rules, and if we do this, or if he does this, or if the guy next to me does this, then I do that, and all that kind of stuff. And he's like, he looked at me, he's like, I'm not saying anything around you because you're a press, even though you're here just working out with us right now. So absolutely not. And so that was the one thing. And then it was funny because this season, Kalen Keller wrote a piece for The Athletic, I think it was, about Rodgers' hand signals. And Rodgers was flaming mad about it because some of his former teammates talked about him, some of these things, and he was so upset, irrationally upset, and it was kind of a jerk about it because of course he was, because he's Aaron Rodgers. But he was super mad about the hand signal stuff, and the Aaron Rodgers hand signals, Aaron Rodgers scramble drill rules are the only things I've really heard that are like super secretive. And okay, fine. How much of that is just Aaron Rodgers being paranoid versus like actual things that you couldn't learn by watching tape, etc.?
So just as a point of comparison, so Kirk, right? Kirk was here for a long time, obviously in Minnesota. Kirk went through these great comprehensive lengths to make sure that all of our hot words and all of our hand signals were super insulated. So every single week he would watch the TV copy, and if he heard, so we had a cadence that was like yellow cadence, and he was like, oh, they heard yellow on the TV copy, we got to change it to dummy this week. And it's like, okay, so every week you're learning a whole bunch of new hand signals and calls, but he went to painstaking lengths to make sure that every single thing that he did was insulated and kept the offense sound. So the fact that Aaron Rodgers hadn't changed his hand signals for 5 years is mind-blowing to me, that's even a thing. Because I guarantee you, those receivers go to different teams, they tell so just as an example, I got cut from Atlanta. I went to Houston. We were playing Atlanta. And they said, do you have anything on Atlanta? And I said, yes, I just was in training camp with them. So I copied all my notes into a Word document and sent it to them. So they knew all the cadences. They knew all the 2-minute stuff. That happens. And if you don't go around insulating those things, then teams are going to know from guys like me, from watching film, whatever it is. And I think the transfer of coaches from staffs is also pretty significant. So the fact that Aaron Rodgers was getting heated about that, I think is kind of ridiculous, honestly. But, hey, what do I know? So
yeah, it was so dumb. It was so dumb. Like going after the reporter, and it's like, that's actually not what happened in the piece. If you read it, I didn't steal anything. Your guys just talked. All the stuff you need, all the stuff that you didn't know you needed. That's what we get for you here at Take Command. Coming up later this week, our second podcast that'll come out Thursday morning on all the audio platforms, probably Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday evening on YouTube. Will be a Senior Bowl preview. So we will have Logan actually down at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama. I miss that. It was actually my favorite NFL event of the year. I loved going down to Mobile. It's just a super relaxed atmosphere. You get so much access. Obviously, for someone like you, it's incredible because you get to be at all the practices, and the view that you'll be able to get of practice of all these prospects is top notch. It's so much better than the combine in that way. So like the combine workouts, it's funny because you're in Indianapolis and then you're sitting in the hotel watching on TV like everybody at home.
Dude, you can't. That was the crazy thing. Is I had good media access when I was in Indianapolis, but I couldn't go watch the stuff.
Nope.
Yeah.
You're watching on TV. So I remember being with some of the trainers that were training my guy Yo Murphy down in Tampa, who had like the last year I was there was like Naeem Hines' year, and I remember him being with him watching Naeem's 40 in a hotel lobby. So it's like things like that that are weird about Indy, but you're right there in Mobile. So Logan will be on. I think we might have one of our media scouting buddies on as well. So excited for that. We'll get into some of the top prospects in the draft, some of the top prospects in the Senior Bowl. That'll all be on the pod later this week. I know our guy Sam Fortier is going to join soon as well. So looking forward to having Sam on maybe next week. So plenty of good stuff to come here on Take Command, which is why you should subscribe wherever you're listening right now. And we will see you Thursday, again, wherever you're watching or listening, or somewhere else. You can watch there too. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.